Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.
Are you looking for a space where you don't have to explain your autism to be seen, heard, and understood? I am Aradia.
My name is Cheryl.
My name is Patrice Riley.
I'm Matthew.
We are the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, the world's first autistic-led peer support coaching organization. And we're here to talk about... What topic are we doing today, my fellow coaches?
Is it bonding or trauma bonding?
Trauma or trauma bonding. Not a small topic, but we're going to break it down into half an hour or so of talk. So let's start with our definition of what was our inciting question for this conversation? Why do we think that this is a thing we want to talk about? So we have a thing we've observed in our work as coaches, in our lives as autistic people, living out and trying to understand all this autism, neurodiversity stuff, is we've noticed in ourselves and others that sometimes there's a tendency to cling to what is familiar, to stay in a particular thought form because it is comforting and we have found community there. I mean, in a lot of different contexts, but I think especially for us as autistic people and people questioning their neurotype and their neurodivergence, like you find community with people who are having a tough time, right? Those are the first people you bond with online, as people saying, I'm having a hard time in this way. And you bond together and it's great. And you find community. And then maybe you're afraid of growth. Maybe you can't identify with anything outside of that group. And maybe you start actually resisting making changes and exploring yourself in a more holistic way. So trauma bonding, right? Finding community through adversity. It's a normal part of the human experience and it's good to a certain extent. And then sometimes we trap ourselves. And particularly in our autistic work, we see a lot of people trapping themselves into burnout or thinking that they're burned out and performing burnout without actually being burned out because that's the only way they know to relate to themselves. And yeah, we thought that would be an interesting topic to discuss. And before recording was on, I feel like I was talking the least. So maybe one of my other coaches wants to contribute to this.
Well, I would like to first just really acknowledge that what brings people together in their pain can result in a really tight bond. And for someone, if they're used to feeling alone in their pain, it can be very alluring to stay connected to what initially brought them together. And I just want to really acknowledge that when I've experienced growing beyond the dynamic that brought me into a group, there's real grief in acknowledging that I've grown past this relationship, and that's real. And so I really understand the desire to kind of mask what's really going on, to hold on to a connection, especially if that's something that is scarce or has been hard to find in one's life.
Yeah, I think that grief piece is really important to expand on a little bit, because I think it does keep people maybe in situations a little bit longer than is best for them. I know personally, like I grew up in a very high control religious environment. And so most of my relationships, friendships, peers and things like that, in hindsight, it was based in a lot of trauma. There's fear and guilt and shame that's wrapped up in that kind of religious environment. And when we left, when I was 16, it felt like losing a piece of myself. It felt like having to start over again from scratch. And it felt like I had to figure out who I was through so many different lenses. And then even recently, with everything that's being said right now in the political landscape about autism and our right to exist, I had an interaction with an online interaction with somebody I considered a very good friend that we had bonded for many years over, different shared experiences and challenges and traumas. And she said something that I thought was just so horrific, directed like almost in support of eugenics towards autistic people. And I just, in that moment, it was like I couldn't even talk to her. I couldn't continue that relationship. We can agree on everything else, but that one thing, it was too much. And there is that sense of, I don't know who I'm going to be moving forward without these relationships. It's like I'm starting over again.
Right. And relationships are one of the biggest ways we understand ourselves is like through relation to other people. It's like pretty intrinsic to being the social animals that we are. So like double existential dread there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, as you mentioned earlier, like this is a big reason why autistic adults are able to even connect with anybody, right? Like so many of us, whether we're identified as kids or as teenagers or even much later in life, like a lot of us don't have access to space where we can be with other autistic people and share our truths and be honest. And that inherently means that a lot of traumatic subjects are going to come up and talking about real hard things are going to come up, right? Most of us don't want to be in spaces where we're just talking about the toxic positivity elements of autism, right? Which is such a small minority of autistic people to begin with, right? Most of us, we're talking about how we don't know when to go to the bathroom and not knowing how to manage it when our favorite item isn't on the menu when we go there after schlepping out there, or not being able to stand because the sound outside of our home is so overwhelming that we are collapsing and crying and are out of commission for a week, where the smallest thing happening in my house is having me bang my head against the wall. Right? Like those are much more going to be the topics that we're talking about in these spaces. And so for the first time, people are able to connect to others. And another one of those big things that a lot of us connect on is burnout, right? Like so many people understand that they're autistic later in life when they're in autistic burnout and understand that and find others and finally have words and a term to put to something. And then meet other people like that. And what happens though, like when you're not in burnout anymore? What happens when you start getting regulated? I think something that a lot of us see very often, whether in autistic peer support coaching or in therapy or just in the general autistic community, are those who are almost afraid to confront the things that are putting them in burnout out of fear of not being able to connect anymore and losing that community, as you all said. And it begins then to define autism according to only being burned out. And not to say that most of us aren't in burnout, we are. But it leads to this idea of inevitability that it can't be, and that maybe you're not really autistic if you're not in burnout. You see this a lot on Reddit, right? Of groups on Reddit who are just about how everything is negative and has to be negative, and if you have anything that's not negative, like you do not belong or you are not welcome. I don't know where I'm taking that, but it scares me.
Yeah, I think you really described it really well, the dynamic that you're seeing. And what I found in my own personal journey of healing is that there needs to be almost a parallel process in developing these relationships and community with developing a relationship with myself and really getting to know the parts of me that are scared of losing friends or colleagues or employers as I change, and really hold those fears and really listen to those concerns. Because then when those concerns feel heard by me, by my greater self, they don't feel so alone, and I don't feel so prone to cling to relationships that need to evolve or end. So it can be very human to look outside of ourselves for validation and approval. And part of my growth as an autistic person has been looking to myself for that and not abandoning this connection with myself in order to maintain a connection with others.
I'm just so glad you mentioned the individual piece, Patrice, the individual like relationship with self and that like inner healing journey. Because like for many of us who have like autistic people who are in burnout or who have experienced burnout, a big piece of that is denying our own needs for a really long time, either not knowing what they are or knowing them but not being able or willing to address them, and kind of set that boundary. There's one of my favorite quotes is no is a necessary magic. It draws a circle around us saying that we have given enough. And I think as we begin to do that in our own individual healing journey and say, I matter, my needs matter, I'm going to be taking care of myself, I'm going to be getting the support from my community or, whatever my support system is, that changes us too. Different priorities start to come up, different way of looking at the world. And so people in your circle who maybe aren't in that place yet, who still feel very much like they need to make themselves small or not honor their needs, you often find that bit of a lack of compatibility. And so you either have to decide, I'm going to move forward with my own healing journey. And like Patrice, you said, some relationships do fall away, or you stay stuck, you stay small, you stay in that old pattern. But I will say very briefly the opposite side of this too for just a brief second here. There is something beautiful about developing a very strong relationship with somebody, even if it is perhaps, we're talking about trauma bonding. I remember I met somebody before I knew I was autistic, and we were in a very high stress job, and within like moments of meeting we just knew that we were a good match, and we started these like in-depth conversations. We did not do small talk, we did not care about the weather. It was just like boom, we're going into like our childhood and our religious trauma and all this stuff. And having that support was so integral to my survival in a really, really hard situation. So it's not to say that trauma bonds can't, be necessary for a time. I think maybe the problem becomes when that's the only thing that's keeping you in that relationship.
Yeah, that's a really good distinction, Cheryl. It's almost like, yeah, you might need to go to the emergency room for care for a while, but you ultimately don't want to be staying there for a long period. Ultimately, you want to move into more kind of gradual healing, layers of care. Yeah, thanks for making that distinction.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about Matt's question about like, what happens when we start getting regulated. And yeah, sometimes that trauma bond is the first time you actually start to be able to find some kind of regulation, but then you have to keep following that new thing and not just cycling. And like, I've been thinking a lot lately about one of the questions that Matt has in his newly identified, like newly come to the revelation groups is like, who were you as a kid? Like, who is the kid that like you've pushed aside? And like, I've been, in some level of burnout since I was a kid. And so unpacking that has been a very long, slow process. And I've been getting back to like stuff that I was doing like around the time that burnout started to really like factor into my childhood, and like rediscovering who I am there and what regulation in that context feels like. It takes a lot of curiosity to find that thread that's different than the rhythms I've been in and pull on that thread and discover what that regulation looks like, because it's so unfamiliar. It's so unfamiliar, and it takes a lot of curiosity, like truly bravery and curiosity together.
Yeah, Aradia, I was just going to say it takes a lot of courage to what you would call in psychology individuate, to become who you are and not just reacting to what you think other people want you to be or need you to be in any moment. It takes real courage to become your own person. And as we're healing from burnout, that requires us recognizing, I actually need this. When I do this, I feel better. I'm starting to feel really different from my community. In every spiritual tradition, there's kind of that metaphor of like being lost in the desert for 40 days. We go through a period where we're lost in the woods, and we maybe don't connect to the communities we used to. And we're really learning I guess another metaphor is like the hermit crab, like has moved out of its old shell, but it isn't in the new one yet. And there's this period of just needing to be very courageous and curious about, where do I go from here? And so I really have a lot of compassion for those who are scared to do that, and or for whom it might feel overwhelming, and the comfort of, I just want to stay in this community, or identify as burnout, because I don't want to go out in the desert. I don't want to be a hermit crab without a shell. That makes a lot of sense to me, that anyone would feel that way.
Yeah, especially if no one else is going there. You're like, wait, you want me to pioneer this brave new world?
Yes.
We ride at dawn.
Yeah. Yeah. And imagine, like, you got this healing and community, and it's like, I just got this human community. Now you're telling me I need to be lonely again in order to heal? That feels like a bad deal. Yeah, I get that.
The other thing though that I've kind of observed in some of the circles and workshops that I've been in has when when people so strongly identify with a particular identity, like being in burnout, it really does seem to narrow people's ability to hear. So when people are sharing their experiences of what might work to help you get out of burnout, right? Their own lived experience, their own journey, it's almost like there are certain people, I can just almost see their ears closing, because it's like that doesn't, it can't get past that border guard of, no, that doesn't jive with my identity. That doesn't jive with the persona that I needed for such a long time to be able to belong and be in this group and be in this space. And now you're telling me, like, well, just rip off the band-aid. And it's like the advice or the encouragement or the strategies, they don't permeate. And I mean that, so it's almost like they're going around, to use another desert analogy, like going around the mountain in the desert for a really long time, and you kind of just keep spinning back around, and you see a lot of people feeling stuck, which can be a frustrating experience.
Yeah. I think that's why we hear so much of what brings people to take a next step is really because where they are becomes so painful, it actually becomes less scary to take the step. And you hear that in 12-step groups a lot, that need to hit some kind of rock bottom before there's a willingness to make a change. And, that does make sense to me. So I wonder if then there is maybe for listeners who are finding themselves in this place, is there anything we might want to offer to that person who's maybe hearing part of themselves in the description of really connecting to the identity of being in burnout and starting to really wonder, having some curiosity around, is this serving me to stay really connected to this identity?
Yeah, now we've identified the problem. What are some actionable ways to explore this in ourselves? Because it's all going to be different, right? Some of us need weighted blankets. Some of us don't, right? How do we explore this in a way that is not just grabbing another listicle and finding more burnout that way? Like, yeah, how do we identify that we're in that space, and how do we start coming out of it and cultivating that curiosity and courage? I have been on such an alliteration train for like the past 2 weeks. Every time I say something, it comes out alliteratively. I
think it comes down to something, on the one hand, extremely simple, and on the other hand, paradoxically and obviously, the opposite of simple. But am I doing this only to keep safe? Am I doing this to perform? Or am I doing this to be authentic and connect? And it can feel like, oh, of course, if I'm speaking about my burnout, if I'm speaking about my trauma, I'm obviously being authentic. I'm not doing it for performance. But at what point, when you actually just put your hands up and say, oh no, I'm just kind of going with the flow now, does it actually become performance? Are you only doing it in order to stay safe? Because if you're doing anything in order to attain a certain goal, right? Is that truly coming from you, or is it coming from the outside? Right? You all spoke about masking in this context, right? I think it's it is masking, right? And so, on the one hand, we don't have to look at it in any different way than we look at any type of masking, right? Why am I doing this? What is it serving me? Is there a more sustainable way to get this need met than besides negating my long-term needs?
Yeah, those are good questions, Matthew, to ask oneself. I find when I'm feeling stuck or conflicted inside, I like to sit and really inquire. It really helps me to go out and take a walk. Being in nature in a wild place helps bring a lot of space and clarity. And sometimes I like writing in a journal. And, I wonder if you all have other suggestions of what works for you to really sit with these questions that Matthew has posed.
I know for me, what I've actually done in the past has been it does require some conscious effort, is to for a time remove myself from certain spaces that have become a bit of an echo chamber. So like for example, when I was deconstructing from evangelicalism, I was in this space of, being in support groups online where everyone was just constantly rehashing, the trauma and the experience and the anger. And for a very brief time, that was actually therapeutic. That was powerful. It was like I found another group of people who understand. I don't have to pretend. But everyone has to kind of really be listening to that inner voice, because there was a time, and I could sense it, where that it no longer served me. I was ready to move out of that space and into like trusting myself as the expert again. And it does take different amount of some time for everybody, but sometimes I have to go on almost like a fast of books and videos and everything and social media, just for a time to be like, you know what? Everyone else's experiences are valid, but I need to get back in touch with my own. And that has been really powerful for me to tune out some of the outside voices.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest like single step has been like really addressing not just the fact that I have negative self-talk, but who it's for, and like who I crafted all those negative self-talk scripts for, and then trying to not perform for those people. My parents from 20 years ago are very much not present, right? Even though my parents are still around, they are the parents of today, not of 20 years ago. And so like realizing that those scripts were written for people who don't exist anymore, and being like, all right, so if I'm not performing for them, then who am I performing for? And like that has been the question that like, I continue to perform for other people, but I have a thread I can pull on and like start, keep popping those onion layers off. Yeah, just figuring out who I'm performing for. And then eventually, sometimes these magical moments happen where I'm just performing for myself, just for my like unburned out inner child self. That's the only person left to perform for. And at that point, I just am. And it happens very occasionally. But I have those moments where I'm like, if I was performing just for my own immediate body comfort, what would I do? And that I can choose that very, very occasionally. But yeah, identifying, and I mean that's the community, right? Like the community you surround yourself with is who you're performing for, right? If you're with people who are deconstructing one thing, like yeah, you're going to shape yourself that way. I do a podcast within a very, very niche fantasy community. So like sometimes, yeah, I end up seeing the entire world through Wheel of Time archetypes and world mechanics. And everyone I know is a Wheel of Time fan. And then someone comes along and doesn't know what the one power is. And I'm like, why are you even in my reality? Like, what are we doing? So like, I think like you said, Cheryl, it's really good to have a fast from certain spaces and remember that like other angles on the world exist. And the thing too with like the burnout conversation is like, and also looping back to the negative self-talk, is like constantly thinking like, well, I'm not disabled, I'm just lazy, right? And then you find people who are like actually burned out and have a reason for it other than being lazy. And you're like, oh my God, I can actually start to unpack some of this negative self-talk because now I know I'm not lazy, I'm disabled. And like that is such a profound first step that it's very easy to see how you could stay there and just be like, nah, this revelation is good forever.
Yeah, it takes real discernment to go from realizing what's necessary validation and when it is time to move on. But I think the real gift of answering that call of moving on and stepping further on the healing journey is that perhaps you will get to feel better, and then perhaps you'll become a model of autistic joy for others, and you'll become someone who others can look to as lighting the way. And that's really important. And we need more autistics who are feeling joyful to lead the way. So you're not just helping yourself, but you're helping the whole community when you walk into the desert.
And not judging ourselves if we feel like we've gone backwards. Because I really do want to mention like the binary sometimes of whenever we're getting into like healing conversations or inner journey, things like that. I know I've fallen into the trap of, I'm either burnt out or I'm doing amazing. I'm either healed or I'm broken. And those binaries really do not serve. And they get me stuck and they get me in that, that inner thought loop that, Aradia, you were mentioning. So I just want to just really highlight and stress from my own experience that two things can be true. You can be struggling with burnout or coming out of burnout, and you can also be looking to create a new life. You can be looking towards mentors who are showing you a different path, and there's just so many things that you could hold space for, more than one thing at one time. And then the grace piece of, you know what, today sucked, but I did my best. Or today sucked and I didn't do my best and it still sucked, but tomorrow, let's try it again. So like two things can be true, and the grace piece has been integral for me in the last couple of years since I discovered my autism.
Yeah, progress is not linear at all. And yeah, like the idea that, oh, I'm healed today, so I'll never be unhealed feeling again. No.
Which I think is a totally autistic way of being, right? It's the neuronormative world and Protestant work ethic, which teaches us like you have to be, autistic people are always accused of all or nothing, but actually all or nothing is what our society is always pushing. And it's like, oh, you either have to be autistic as fuck and like 100% all in, or you have to have really all bad days or really all good days. Like our goal is never to just like go from 0 to 100, 100 to 0, right? Like life's fucking messy, and that's okay. And we have to normalize that, like, it's okay. Like, we're disabled. A lot of days aren't going to be easy. Most days are not going to be easy. And just because they're not easy doesn't mean that they're all horrible. And if you're listening and like, my days are all amazing and nothing is ever hard for me, then okay, then maybe you don't relate to this. Doesn't mean that you're not autistic, right? It means that maybe you don't struggle as much as the next person. And doesn't mean it's always going to be that way either. Right?
Yeah. It's very 2 steps forward, 1 steps back. Yeah.
7 steps sideways, 8 steps the other sideways, jumping up and down in place.
And I think sometimes we have to challenge some of the old definitions of even what healing means. I know I internalized the message that healing means fixing what was broken. So now I'm perfect. And it's such a, capitalist, productivity type of attitude towards healing. Like, oh, I'm never going to have a bad day. Like all of my parts are going to be working in perfect harmony. Like everything's good. And, expanding our ideas and our understanding of what healing actually means. Like for me, my definition has become more like increasing my capacity for joy, or increasing the amount of grace and compassion I can give to myself in any given day, right? It can be just observing the inner thoughts instead of trying to constantly beat them into submission. I mean, like, I think if we can all kind of maybe define healing for ourselves, as opposed to, again, taking that all or nothing view of fixing, that can kind of like ease and like bring a little bit more space and let us breathe a little bit. Like we're allowed to be real, messy human beings, not a machine that has to always be working at capacity. And I think that goes into the burnout discussion too.
Yeah, so the capacity to be with what is, whether it's a good day or a hard day, and allowing whatever comes up. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, I so much lately have just been doing the same behaviors, but having different internal talk. Oh, I'm observing that I'm just sitting on the couch, not doing the work I want to do. Instead of beating myself up, I'm observing. Same external behavior, but wildly different internal experience. I just want to put in one more note that progress is also not cumulative. This is something that drives me. I fall into this trap all the time. You can always do better than you did yesterday. And if you do a little bit more tomorrow than you did, that is called cancer.
Yes.
That cannot possibly be a linear process that sustains forever. You have to be able to do less tomorrow than you did today sometimes. Otherwise, What are we doing? I just wanted to get that one last thought out. Yeah, this is a conversation that could go for years, and it probably will here on this podcast. We will return to this topic. Stay tuned. Subscribe, like, share, all of the things that every other channel has ever told you to do.
But actually do it. Like, that would be really appreciated. Like, don't just say you're gonna like it. Don't just say you're gonna share it. Actually do it. And then people will see it. And you'll be helping others. You'll be happy. We'll be happy. Actually do it.
Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.